All right, so tonight we're fortunate to have Todd Stout with us again. I'm sure many of you remember the marvelous presentation that he gave us this past autumn on resolving the Ansocaris sour orange tip complex. So Todd has over 35 years of experience studying and raising butterflies in many portions of the US, and he has provided school and public presentations and displayed exhibits on butterflies and their life cycles. Along with several other lepidopterists, Todd is currently working on a book on the butterflies of Utah. He has served as past president and secretary of the Utah Lepidopterist Society and has served on the executive council of the Lepidopterist Society. He was also the MC for the Society's meeting in 2014, held in Park City, Utah. Especially relevant to this talk, he has created the website Raising Butterflies DIY in 2010, which teaches how to locate and raise many North American butterflies. And he owns a business providing butterfly breeding equipment under the same brand. So he is going to expand on that and provide us a lot of information tonight about raising butterflies. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Todd.
Thank you. Let me share the right screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, let me see if I can minimize the people because they're over my, there we go. How you guys all doing? I guess you're all muted, so you can't answer back. Again, welcome to today's presentation on raising butterflies. The information presented today will basically discuss different strategies and techniques I've learned over the decades regarding how to obtain butterfly eggs and caterpillars and successfully raise them to adult butterfly. Today's presentation, I can get the mouse in the right place. There we go. Today's presentation basically pulls from previous presentations that I've given, including recently tips on raising viceroys and red spotted purples, where I was flown out to Virginia, the Butterfly Society of Virginia, to talk to them about how to find Bastianics and Archippus larvae and how to take care of them, as well as a recent presentation I gave to the Butterfly Professionals Convention on obtaining eggs by collecting gravid females in the field. I'll be pulling some information from that today, as well as some other local presentations, including I did a presentation on the benefits of raising butterflies and learning butterfly life histories provided for the Lepidopterist Society in 2010 in Leavenworth, Washington. So I wanted to start off, many of you were present for David James' really cool presentation on the lives of butterflies and the book that he wrote, and he talked about that last month. And I asked for his permission to share this slide. He had an epiphany back in the late 60s with tortoiseshell butterflies, the peacock on the right, and I'm not sure that small tortoiseshell butterfly. I'm not an expert on English butterflies, but he had an epiphany. Well, I'll just read what he said. He said, back in the late 1960s, when I was a young boy in England, I had my life changed forever by seeing dozens of gorgeous small tortoiseshell butterflies feeding on thistles in a wild area adjacent to playing fields, while other butterflies were concentrated, while other boys, concentrated on sports. I spent time in this unkept area watching the butterflies. I too had an epiphany in the late 60s, growing up in Southern California. And my butterfly wasn't the tortoiseshells, but I fell in love. My first butterfly wasn't the monarch or wasn't the tortoiseshell, it was the Western tiger swallowtail. Maybe I could share a story. I was walking on my block, minding my own business, and I saw for the first time in my life 2 Western tiger swallowtail males nectaring on a flower. I think it was zinnia, and I caught it with my hands, and I was just enthralled. I couldn't believe how beautiful this butterfly was. I had noticed moths up until that time, but not butterflies. A neighbor lady came up to me and she says, "You let that go." I wasn't a very rebellious child, but I blew her off, and I ran home with this butterfly in cups of my hands, and I put it in a jar, and the rest is history. So that was my epiphany as a Western tiger swallowtail, one of my favorite butterflies. I think many people have a mentor when they initiate their interest in butterflies. I'm hearing an echo. Is everybody muted?
I'm checking it right now.
Okay. Anyway, I think that's better. I think everyone knows who their mentor was growing up. And when I was in Southern California, I never met John Adams Comstock. I just kept checking out his book over and over again. I'd take it to the library, it would become due, I'd bring it back, we'd check it out. This was going on for years. I was just enthralled by the color plates on this book, especially the dark swallowtails, Edward swallowtail, Papilio interpergamus, the California pipeline swallowtails, because I never saw them. And I didn't even think they existed, but I said, someday I'd like, I asked my dad to take me to the San Bernardino Mountains and whatnot. But anyway, make a long story short, as a child, my mom sewed me a net and I went around the neighborhood. In addition to western tigers, found pale swallowtails, as well as mourning cloaks, skull frits, cabbage whites, fiery skippers, sakums, marine blues, and so forth, including our Vanessas, red admirable, painted lady, West Coast lady. And so that was basically my initial knowledge about butterflies. But I noticed in Comstock's book reference to anti-swallowtail. And as a child, I would see one anti-swallowtail a year, and I was obsessed with catching one. But every time I saw one, I'd be walking home from school or playing football in a neighbor's yard, and I would see an anti-swallowtail fly. I didn't even get a swing at one for 10 years, but finally, right before we left Southern California, I was finally able to get one. So as a child, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I didn't understand the concept of distribution and habitat. And I live 2 miles from the Verdugo Mountains in Glendale, California. And so every once in a while, I'd see an occasional pale swallowtail or variable checker spot, Chalcedon checker spot, Sarah orange tip. I caught one my whole life on my block, and I didn't understand that you have to go into the mountains, into their habitat to find them. I lived along the periphery of these butterflies. And so I kind of became hooked because I'd see one a year. In the case of Lorquin's Admiral, I saw one in 10 years in Glendale and was just thrilled to finally find it. I then moved to Everett, and didn't know much about the butterflies of Cascadia. It's a shame I didn't go to Pacific Northwest Lepidoptera workshop. Sorry, I'm talking faster than I should be. Maybe I'm a little nervous. Got a lot of content to cover, but the butterflies I did see were in my yard. Another stray Lorquin's Admiral, but I had no idea how to get to Silver Lake or find its habitat. And then the pine whites would be flying along the Doug firs about 50 feet. So I love those, but I kind of went dormant in my teenage years in Everett. And that kind of goes over my epiphany in childhood. So today, the 2 sources I want to recommend to raise butterflies. There's probably more than these, just 2, but many of you know about the life histories of Cascadia butterflies by the 2 Daves. And it is awesome. It goes into incredible detail about raising every species. I'll be talking about getting eggs out of females as a technique to start to raise butterflies. And I think they did that for every species in Cascadia, if I'm not mistaken. And that is just really noteworthy. And my website talks about the basics for beginners, techniques, and setup. Species specific is based upon all the content and techniques for trinomials. So also I have a YouTube channel that and we'll be sharing a few of these today, providing short tidbits on different aspects of how to raise butterflies. I think I've got like 72. Before we dive in, I just want to give a high-level overview. I know most of you know this. It's very basic. But just to go over the life history of a caterpillar, female lays the egg, first instar hatches, feeds for a time, and then it grows to the point where it can no longer feed. It molts its skin. A new head capsule is formed. You have second instar and so forth, the third, fourth, and the fifth instar, when it finishes, goes to prepupa and pupates. And the length of this metamorphosis depends upon the species and its overwintering stage. I'm talking about monarchs here, so monarchs overwinter as adults. And then basically, we're just going to talk about different types of equipment you'll use to raise butterflies and to emerge them. And so that's stating the obvious at 60,000 feet. So basically, the 2 disciplines for today's presentation is how to obtain eggs and caterpillars, immatures, and how to raise them to healthy butterflies. And to raise them, I mean, basically, it's how to get them and how to take care of them. And so I take these 2 basic overarching themes and split it into 3, which is if you're going to get them, how are you going to get them? You need to find them in nature, eggs and caterpillars, and a caterpillar hunt. And then we'll also talk about how to obtain eggs from gravid females. So that's the first part. How do you get them? And then the last section is how do we successfully raise them to healthy adult butterflies? And the how can be broken down into techniques and basic equipment. So let's talk about how to obtain eggs and caterpillars. There's a popular method, but not terribly productive for all species. And then there's a less popular one that can be very productive. So And the more productive, excuse me, the less productive one is to find them in nature, go on a caterpillar hunt. And then the less popular one is actually get a butterfly net and catch the female and set her up to lay eggs. So we're going to talk about number one, find them in nature. And I want to talk about 11 tips on as applicable to different species. Now, these 11 tips tend to be species group specific, but the first two are almost a preamble or a prerequisite. And I'll just read these off and then we'll go into detail later on. Learn host plants, diapause stage for local butterflies. 2, accompany an experienced mentor and have them teach you in the field. 3, focus on isolated host plants within a larger colony. 4, look for new growth on host plants. 5, look for caterpillar-specific chew marks and feeding damage. 6, seek out leaf shelters or nests on host plants. And since Brian here, I'll mention tents of megathymus. We're not going to get into that, but that's also something you're looking for. It's a cue you're looking for. 7, seek out ants tending caterpillars or ants carrying caterpillars into ant holes for protection against predation. That's only for lacinity or gossamer butterflies. 8, seek out certain areas of a host plant where females prefer to lay eggs. 9, seek out dead stalks where checker spot post-diapause caterpillars sometimes like to rest when not feeding. 10, shake or bang host plants with extensive inflorescence to shake out some lacinate caterpillars. And 11, investigate the periphery of smaller host plants where some caterpillars prefer to rest. So the first one, learn host plant diapause stage for butterflies. And last Monday, Caitlin Labar shared this link on the Butterflies and Moths of the Pacific Northwest Facebook page on the summary of Washington butterflies. This book is an amazing free download in that it not only lists host plants for all Washington species and subspecies, but also shares their diapause stage. So that's huge. And you can just download it for free at northwestbutterflies.com. And it's just an amazing resource to have. As I've done caterpillar exhibits over the years, I've shown the life histories. It shows 2 of the species we're going to kind of be going back several times today. Two-tailed swallowtails and Lorquin's admirals. Multigodatus overwinters as pupae. Lorquini overwinters as caterpillar. Red admirable overwinters as adult. And the hedgerow hairstreak overwinters as egg. So the next piece of advice, find an experienced mentor and have them take you out in the field and teach you the ropes. The second tip, which I consider mandatory, is to find somebody that can help you. And in this picture, I've got JP on the left, David James, Caitlin Labar on the bottom row, Bob Pyle talking to Jack Harry, who's one of my mentors, Dave Nunnally, and the last 3, you see the picture of Colonel Clyde Gillette and Jack Harry again, and Wayne Whaley. When I was really excited about this, they were my mentors. I'd call them on the phone and drive them crazy, including, I don't have a picture of Steve Sommerfeld, who was also instrumental in mentoring me back in the day. He doesn't like his photo taken or shared, so I'm not including one of him. But the more you'll have an accelerating learning curve if you could have an expert just teach you the ropes one-on-one. Okay, another tip: focus on isolated host plants within a larger colony. An example of that, and I don't know how this applies in Cascadia, but since Lorquin's admirals don't fly in Utah, and I had some experience with them in California and Washington State, I've always been really passionate about learning everything I can about Lorquin's admirals. The picture on the left here shows the highway. It's called Bogus Basin Highway. You come down from Bogus Basin Ski Resort. And up at the ski resort, it's up at elevation, so you have plenty of aspens up there, plenty of chokecherries, service berries, and other willows that serve this butterfly. But I've had luck being able to find caterpillars as I drive down back towards Boise, where the willows become much more scarce. And to share this concept, I want to share a video. Let's see here. I want to share a video. This video is not taken in Idaho, but it's actually taken in Florida, where I talk about some similar strategies. Let's see. Okay, let me go back and unshare this, because I want to make sure that you can hear it just a minute. Okay, share sound. Sorry, I forgot to click on that. Okay, so there's the screen. So I want to share video on some of the benefits of finding localized and short stands of host plants within a larger colony to facilitate finding early stages. So you guys can't hear this, let me know.
Hi, this is Todd, and today is Sunday,
Good, Todd. Good, Todd.
June 5th, 2017. We are in Wildwood, Sumter County, Florida, and I want to talk today about some techniques to locate the caterpillars of the Florida viceroy, Limenitis archippus floridensis. The Florida viceroy actually mimics the eastern queen and not the monarch. It's a little bit darker. And some tips to find caterpillars: they feed on Carolina willow, Salix caroliana. And today we're going to talk about some tips of finding caterpillars. I have found some eggs in here, and there is a lot of willow here. So I'm walking along the road, and I can guarantee you there's some caterpillars that can be found. But when you find large stands of willow, the productivity of finding viceroy caterpillars tends to drop because there's so much host plant that the females have to choose from. So what you want to do when you find a lot of host plant like this is try to find patches along the side of a highway or a side of a road where you have small stands of isolated willow, hopefully that are shorter, which will improve your productivity. So we're going to go to a different location and show how that works. Okay, we have ventured a little bit further west along Highway 44. We are along the highway in a depression where there's natural accumulations of water here in this semi-gully, and the willows are much more scarce here. But where there are isolated stands of willows, female viceroys have fewer targets to choose from, and so our productivity in finding eggs and caterpillars, even hibernacula, will be a little bit more productive. So let's see how we do. Okay, so we walk up to this plant, and right there is a rolled leaf hibernaculum of the Florida viceroy. So he's gone into hibernation right here, and that will not focus, so I'll get a better still shot. That would be an egg. So whenever you're looking for viceroys or red spotted purples, always focus first on the tip of the leaf. The eggs are laid on the tip of the leaf, and the caterpillars construct a conspicuous perch and actually rest on that perch at first, second, and third instar. There's Physiotes, female.
I think that's Physiotes fan.
Here we have a second instar, and he's, I'll get a better still shot, sitting on his perch. Here we have a hibernaculum with a caterpillar that's backed out a little bit. When they build a hibernaculum, they do that at third instar when they hibernate. This, hard to see, I apologize, this is a second instar. See the saddle? They measure day length to assess whether they go into diapause or not. Here we have a large fifth instar. Obviously when they get to be big fifth instars, they're no longer building perches. So I've looked on a lot of willows, but one thing that helps is when you know that there's a population, try to focus on areas where there isn't a lot of host plant, creating a situation where the female viceroy has fewer options, and you'll tend to be productive where you look right there.
Okay, so that's just kind of a summary of what you're looking for when, and it's not a whole lot different with Lorquin's admirals. When I find isolated willows in Idaho or other places, I know that in Utah it's harder to find Wiedemeyer's admirals because there's just host plant everywhere. So let me get back to where we're going. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Okay, so that's just an example of isolated host plant for the genus Limenitis for Lorquin's admirals or Lorquini. Speaking of bogus basin highway, Jack Wolf and I have been known to go there to do the same thing, actually looking for Lorquin's admiral's hibernacula. So I know you all know that I love orange tips, but Lorquin's admirals has been one of my favorite butterflies over the years, probably because it doesn't, I didn't know where to find it in Glendale, California. I didn't even know where to find it in Everett, Washington, and spend most of my adult life chasing butterflies in the state of Utah. So he's another Utah person. He's since passed away, but he's very knowledgeable about butterflies. And when I'm back east, I don't want to spend too much time with Astyanax, but sometimes you'd see a row of black cherry, which is one of the hosts of the red spotted purples. I would have more luck when I would look on the peripheral trees, looking for the same cues that I just showed you for the Florida viceroy, which also applies to viceroys in Washington as well as Lorquin's admirals. I'm going to jump into the desert a little bit with regards to host plant. This is some desert scrub near Mesquite, Nevada. And the picture on the right is a host plant of the desert orange tip. It's called pinnate tansy mustard Descurini pinnata. But to find eggs of those, I would check a creosote bush. And the two photos you see here are following a wet winter. If it's a dry winter, it doesn't look like that at all. It looks barren, and the host plants of the desert orange tips do not come up, and butterfly pupae extend hibernation for as long as 11 years. So these butterflies, these desert butterflies, are survivors. But to make a long story short, I would check the creosote bush, and if I saw too many, I would just walk away, and then I'd find a creosote bush with 2 or 3 plants, and usually I'd find an egg. There's a picture on the right of the healthy pinnate tansy mustard, but I'd find an egg of the desert orange tip. So you want to be prudent when you're out in the field looking, and if you're in a situation where there's too many plants, go where there's fewer. That's kind of the point of this section, is focus on isolated host plants. Okay, look for new growth on host plants, and we're going to jump back to two-tailed swallowtails. There is an ornamental chokecherry in Utah and in Wyoming and in Colorado. I think it grows in Cascadia. It's called chokecherry Canada Red, and it differs from the native Prunus virginiana that you find in the mountains in that the leaves are burgundy. The more mature leaves are burgundy, and the new growth is green. And so if you're ever interested in looking for eggs or caterpillars of two-tailed swallowtails, focus, I mean, maybe an entire tree will have 5, 6, or 7 little sections of green leaves, the rest being burgundy. Focus on the leaves that are green, and you might find eggs or caterpillars. Especially sometimes these ornamental trees are only grown in limited numbers, 3 or 4 or 5 or 2. And if there is a population in there, a female will often find it, and it's not too difficult to find eggs or larvae. Now, I did talk about the structure of limonitis, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just want to say one more thing about the perches that the admirals and the viceroys make, is that I know there's a lot of moth caterpillars out there that will also have perches, but they don't extend the leaf vein with a frass chain or have that dung debris that you see. This is really unique to the subfamily Limonitid, which for you means California sisters, Adelpha, or the 2 species in Cascadia of Limonitis, which is the viceroy and Lorquin's admiral. So applicable, here's some just examples. The fur on the top row, you've got the California sister, pictured by Koji, of a California sister feeding on oak. And then I did get a chance finally to find Lorquin's admiral's larvae at Silver Lake in Everett when I visited with John when BYU came to play UW. I think it was 2008. And then on the bottom, the one in the middle, you've got the viceroy, which is also applicable to Cascadia. And I've already talked about eggs on the tips of leaves. Just want to talk a little bit about the picture on the right. This was shared on social media where someone says, look, this isn't a monarch, it's a viceroy. Isn't this a wonderful picture of a viceroy? And I chimed in and said, not only is it a viceroy, it's a female laying eggs. And then I circled the eggs, they're kind of blurry. That, I mean, it's great to take a picture of a butterfly, right? But if you're taking a picture of a butterfly laying eggs, I think that takes it to another level. It's kind of neat. So, okay, going back to two-tailed swallowtails, just as limonitis or the admirals or viceroys will chew away at the leaf up to the vein on both sides, two-tailed swallowtails kind of have a unique chew mark pattern, especially for the younger instars. They'll sit on one part of the leaf and they'll chew half of the leaf up to the vein, but not the other half, making this, I don't know what you call it, this half L type situation. But if you see this on a new leaf, look down for a caterpillar and you might find one, or you might find an old pad, which means you can actually extend your search to the burgundy leaves for 3rd or 4th instars. They don't stay on the green leaves, and the leaves don't stay green, and definitely on two-tailed swallowtails. But sticking with two-tailed swallowtails and other Glaucus group swallowtails, pale swallowtails, and western tigers that you have in Cascadia, they will pad the leaf. I don't know if any of you have handled a two-tailed swallowtail caterpillar and you place it on a fresh leaf of ash or chokecherry. And the first thing you do is they bob their head back and forth. They're silking the leaf. I mean, a leaf, these caterpillars is like ice for us. And traction is their first instinct. And to get that traction, they need to silk the leaf, both where they sit and along the trail where they crawl to feed. So silking is huge for the glaucus group of swallowtails. So I've got a question on a lighter note. Why in the world is there a Batman logo on the saddle for two-tailed swallowtails? I don't know if any of you are Star Trek fans, but I always often thought it's not a bat on the two-tailed swallowtails Romulan Star Empire if you're a Star Trek fan. Anyway, I digress. So we're looking for caterpillar-specific chew marks, Indra, and have unique chew marks, and that has everything to do with where you're looking for the first instars. You're actually focusing your eyes on a certain part of the plant where an egg is likely to be laid, and then the first instar caterpillars will have those chew marks if you're too late to find an egg. Monarchs are kind of unique in their chew marks. When an egg hatches on the showy milkweed, they kind of make a circular pattern where they skeletonize the leaf and then they drill through it. On the left, you see a little caterpillar making that semicircular motion, and then they'll finally drill through it. So that's helpful if you're ever looking for monarch caterpillars. I don't know how long we're going to be able to do that with possible listing pending, but generally speaking, there's a lot of other bugs, milkweed bugs and whatnot, that will chew on milkweeds. But the chew patterns of monarchs are kind of unique. And so once you learn that, you'll learn to ignore some of the other milkweed beetles and other patterns on the milkweed. Cabbage whites on brassica and cabbage will also drill holes. So looking for holes will show you either where a caterpillar is or was, and can be helpful. Many of us are very fond of the greenies, Calophyrs sheridanei subspecies. I think you've got Pseudodumatorum in Oregon, and I need to be briefed on your subspecies in Cascadia or at least in Washington State. In Utah, two of our subspecies, Neoperplex on the left and Sheridanei paradoxa on the right. That's the desert green hair streak, and the left is the Sheridan's green hair streak. But if you look for caterpillars for those on the buckwheat, they will skeletonize the leaf in a unique way where you'll find the evidence. So oftentimes when you're looking for caterpillars, look for the evidence, if it's applicable, if it's helpful for you to do so. And that is helpful. And oftentimes when you find the evidence, the caterpillar isn't there anymore. So you kind of have to follow all the leaves on a little branch that has evidence until maybe you'll find a current caterpillar feeding. I've noticed when feeding Myleta crescens on thistles, this is both thistles, non-native in Utah, they'll also skeletonize the leaf and leave that unique pattern. Some of us are interested in raising skippers, and I've noticed that with the European skipper, Thymolycus lineola, you follow skipper Larodia, you follow an orange skipperling, Copiotes oraniacus. I think only European skippers get into Cascadia and Washington, but they make these interesting greater than, less than marks on the tall bladed grasses. That's just, I have no idea why they do it. All three of these species do it. Other Hesperine skippers, such as your woodland skipper or Clodius sylvanoides, they tie the leaves together, and these skippers do as well. But as they become late in stars, you'll see evidence through this unique zigzag or less than, greater than symbol. So that's really an interesting thing to look for. Okay, so let's jump a little bit to leaf shelters that caterpillars can make. Many of you probably know we were talking about stinging nettle before the meeting started. And different species that use stinging nettle, nymphalids, will roll the leaf in different orientation. On the left, you have a Satyr comma, and they will break the stinging nettle at the mid vein and bend it back, making a really conspicuous Satyrus-specific nest, whereas a Milbur's tortoiseshell will just bend the leaves up. And Milbur's tortoiseshells are obviously gregarious. So that's a way to separate the leaf shelters of those two species. And the leaf shelters of Milbur's tortoiseshells are very similar to red admirals, but red admiral eggs are generally laid as singletons, whereas Milbur's tortoiseshells, being a tortoiseshell, are laid in great numbers. Jumping to painted ladies, they will also make leaf shelters out of mallows and thistles. And what's interesting about them is their frass remains in their nest, and skippers won't do that. Skippers keep it clean in the house. Here's another picture of a painted lady. You've got an egg on the right, and the caterpillar is crawling outside of its nest. I think I staged this picture. It's not very natural, but the nest that it made is. seek out leaf shelters or nests on host plants. Some of these gregarious tortoiseshells, still talking about Aglaeus milberti, you have these really cool nests for gregarious young instar larvae. And as they grow larger, they tend to separate sometimes. Sometimes they're still hanging out and really strip down the host plant. Speaking of Milbert's tortoiseshell, very similar with California tortoiseshells on Snowbush ceanothus. You have a picture on the left of gregarious larvae feeding. You can see out of focus, there's a picture of an old nest, and there's some silk in there. And on the right, the fifth instars are starting to separate a little bit. Oftentimes you'll find them solitary. And while we're speaking of tortoiseshells, why not mourning clucks? They feed on willows. On the left, you see young instars in a silken nest. On the right, you see the last instars. Still a lot of them together, but they do like to split out. So the biggest evidence you're looking for, if you're looking for larvae of any of these tortoiseshells, including Nymphalis aniopa, is massive strip down of host plants. Caterpillars of checker spots of the genus Euphydrius. This is a Anesia checker spot. The pre-diapause larvae. Now, this particular butterfly does not overwinter as adults like the tortoiseshells I just showed. These overwinter as half-grown larvae. But so we talk about pre-diapause Euphydrius, and we talk about post-diapause Euphydrius. Hopefully that's self-explanatory. But when you find gregarious larvae, they're in a nest as well. And so that visual cue is kind of obvious. And then on the right, you see a last instar that's separated after it has overwintered as a half-grown larva. Skippers, this is the silver-spotted skipper. For some reason, it's become really rare in Utah, but they will tie, for their host plant, black locust, they will tie the leaves together. On the left, you can't even see the caterpillar, but if you open up the nest, you'd see what you see on the right. It's interesting what these spread-wing skippers do, and this is a common theme. They will chew around most of the leaf, leaving a little isthmus to connect with the rest of the leaf. Otherwise, they chew themselves off completely. And then they curl it around and silk it like you see in the picture to the right. So this is a silver-spotted skipper I took from Arizona. And it was just putting his, actually, I think I pulled the leaf off, the one on the left, and the one on the right is how I found it to begin with. So if you see this pattern on any plant that's a host plant for a spread-wing skipper, that might very well be a skipper larva. Here's a northern cloudy wing, Thryves polylates, making its nest on sweet clover. A picture on the left shows a caterpillar starting that process. Picture on the right is where it has bent the leaf over. This is what the caterpillar looks like at late instar. And on the left, it will switch from Millilotus to alfalfa. And as you can see, it sealed the leaves together. And again, I don't want to get blunt, but they don't poop inside their nests like Vanessas do, or moths. Sometimes they'll stick their butt out the opening and just launch it. They do that for protection, because I've had their caterpillars actually in my office and have had spiders crawl across the wall because they can smell their frass. And where there's frass, there's caterpillars, and they want to eat the caterpillars. So it's kind of interesting. Here's another leaf shelter of northern white skippers. They fly in Washington, and they feed on lots of different mallows, Sphaeroalcia species, and cheeseweed, and so forth. We've spoken a little bit about Snowbush ceanothus. The Pacuvius dusky wing will also make a leaf shelter. So you're looking, when you're out in the field, you're just looking for this evidence. Now, sometimes the evidence is old. You'll find the opening, and you open it up, there's nothing there. That means it's either been eaten or it's moved off to a new nest. So sometimes you just have to be a little persistent. Again, Snowbush ceanothus is a very popular plant for many butterflies, not just the ones we've spoken about. Pale swallowtails use it, and these three species of gossamer wings, Echo azure, hedgerow hairstreak, and brown elfin, as well as California hairstreaks, use this species. So that plant, if you're ever looking for caterpillars, you can look for several different species. Many of you may know about ant symbiosis with Lacina caterpillars on buckwheats and lupins. But if you're interested in finding silvery blue caterpillars, Glaucopsyche ligdamus, or possibly gray hairstreak, Strymon melanus, you can look on the flowers, but there's a really unique relationship between some ants, which are not attacking, but tending to, these ants are tending to these caterpillars. So what happens is these ants feed on honeydew, and these Lacina caterpillars will, once they sense the ants, they will excrete honeydew. The ants will eat it. In return, anything attacks those caterpillars, including butterfly collectors wanting to collect and raise them, those ants will go after them. So it's kind of interesting. Now there is a trick. Sometimes if you look on a host plant for a laciniid caterpillar and you see all these ants, they may be tending aphids, which also create honeydew. So seeing an ant in big numbers on a butterfly host plant that's in bloom isn't necessarily a guaranteed caterpillar. It could be aphids as well. This is a picture of a Spalding's blue. They don't quite make it to Idaho. They don't even make it to Davis County, but they also are tended by ants when they feed on buckwheats. Okay, another helpful hint is to seek out certain areas of the host plant where females prefer to lay eggs. I talked about Indra swallowtails, and sometimes on their host parsleys, this is Lomatium depoperatum in Utah's West Desert. And to look for eggs or larvae, you want to look on the peripheral stalks on plants in between rocks. And when I say you're looking for larvae, I mean eggs to third instars. As they get older, they have different resting preferences. So here's a picture of an Indra swallowtail. You guys have Indra in Cascadia on an egg laid between rocks. This picture was actually taken in southern Idaho, not the Idaho Panhandle, in between Blackfoot and Idaho Falls. I'm trying to remember the name of the place where I took the picture. I didn't add it to this, so I'm getting to see now. And on the right is a West Desert Indra swallowtail on Lomatium depoperatum. Again, between rocks, you've got this egg. So once you understand, if you want to raise Indra swallowtails, they certainly have a preference on which plants they'll even lay on and what parts of that plant. Here's another photo jumping into pairs. I shared this during my last presentation. Just want to bring it up again. If you're finding rock cresses and you have interest in raising pyrids, and by pyrids, obviously Cerocomplex, Julia orange tips, marbles, Euclid hyanthus, Euclid austenitis, and spring whites, or even checkered whites, there are locations on the Becerra, on the rock cresses where females prefer to lay. For example, marbles like to lay on the buds of rock cresses, but on the pedicels where you'll find Anthocris cerocomplex. And if you find multiple eggs on the pedicels, that's usually checkered white, Pontia protasi, Pontia occidentalis, Pontia beckera. And then if you see multiple eggs towards the lower part of the plant, oftentimes those are spring whites. So location means a lot for those particular pyrids. And I shared this last time as well, some pictures of the larvae of those species. Okay, this is again a niche technique, but if you're ever interested in finding post-diapause checker spots, one piece of advice is to seek out dead stalks where post-diapause checker spot caterpillars like to rest. This is rabbit brush. I don't know why they call this a sagebrush checker spot. It's actually feeding on rabbit brush. But when it's not feeding, it's in a real conspicuous place for us human beings to find it. It's on dead stalk. That must give them some sort of advantage against their natural predators. But for us humans, it kind of makes them obvious. They kind of stand out. I've been raising some Anesia checker spots in potted penstemon, which is bearded tongues. And if you look inside this potted plant enclosure, there is a last instar Anesia checker spot, again on a dead stalk. And I just want to say, as I've been raising these this spring, caterpillars not only rest in the dead stalks, they'll go to the side of the cage and rest there. They love it. It's not natural, but to them, it's very advantageous. It's away from the plant, and being away from the plant to rest is helpful for late instars for that particular type of Melitene. Here's a last instar of Euphydrius Anesia alina. Okay, I don't know how popular this technique is, but Lepidopterist will sometimes shake or bang host plants with extensive inflorescence to flush out lacinid larvae. I don't know if Caitlin has done this with her work with Celestrina asheri, or just looked for the caterpillar. But sometimes a caterpillar, this is again Snowbush ceanothus, and in Utah I can bang a plant and get caterpillars of the Echo Azure, hedgerow hairstreak, or brown elfin all in one shake. I mentioned California hair streaks. They won't fall, so that requires a completely different preference. And Dave not only talked about the relationship in Cascadia between Eriogonum and Euphalotes, the buckwheat blues with the different buckwheat host plants. And sometimes I use different techniques to locate these. Sometimes I look for ants tending larvae, but there's 3 species of buckwheats in Utah: sand buckwheat, Eriogonum, Leptocladon, ramostissimum, another variation that's yellow, variation Leptocladon, and crispleaf buckwheat, that it's kind of hard to find larvae because there's so many inflorescence. So you can bang up to 2 species in Utah off of these, which are the pallid blue subspecies emili of Euphalotes pallescens and the Ellis blue Euphalotes ellisii. Going back to checker spots, in addition to dead stuff, if you're looking for post-diapause caterpillars and there's not a lot of growth, oftentimes they like to rest completely off the plant, which may explain why some of my caterpillars in my little setup with the potted plant enclosures are on the enclosure itself, completely away. On the left, you see the caterpillar resting next to its host plant. On the right, you see a caterpillar feeding on penstemon, but you see another caterpillar completely off the plant. And not only does that apply to Anicia checker spots, I know that arachne checker spots don't fly in Cascadia, but it's just a quick example. You see multiple caterpillars hidden in the debris of penstemon strictus. Some of them are on the leaves, some of them are in the dead stuff and completely away from the plant. So if you're looking for checker spots and you know they're using a short scruff, by scruff I mean a type of paintbrush or a penstemon. I know a lot of checker spots in the Pacific Northwest also use snowberry, and snowberry is much more substantial, so they may not rest off the plant at all with snowberry because it's so big. But okay, another caterpillar that tends to rest on the ground away from the host is Rocky Mountain Parnassian, Parnassus smintheus. And I want to share another video to show how. So what I do when I go looking for caterpillars, I go about a month before they fly, and you can find caterpillars either feeding on stonecrop or just resting on the ground. So let me stop sharing PowerPoint and share. Let's see, before I do that. Well, okay, I think I have the. So this was taken up by Francis Peak in Davis County, Utah, kind of very close to Bountiful Peak, where you see my background on Zoom. And this is just me talking about, the possibilities of finding caterpillars of Parnassus smintheus, our subspecies Acei, before they fly. So I'll go ahead and start it.
This is Todd, and today is Saturday, June 24th, 2017, and we are at the vicinity of Francis Peak, Davis County, Utah, looking for caterpillars of the Rocky Mountain Parnassian, which is Parnassus smintheus acei. The host plant for this butterfly is stonecrop, Sedum lanceolata, and right now there are some Rocky Mountain Parnassians on wing. And to find caterpillars, sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's relatively easy. They don't exactly camouflage themselves against the host. As you can see, this is a last instar Rocky Mountain Parnassian caterpillar feeding on the flower heads of the stonecrop. And to find caterpillars, basically you just scan the surface, the area, and here's another last instar feeding on the flowers of the stonecrop. So that's just a heads up. You want to come before they fly. Of course, we have some snowbanks nearby, and so the emergence of this butterfly is not uniform. Some are on wing, some are pupae, and some are still last instar caterpillars. They actually overwinter as eggs and begin feeding on the stonecrop once snow melts in the spring. Thanks.
Okay, were you guys able to hear the audio on that okay?
Yeah, it was just a little bit garbled because of the wind, but it was.
In the background, that was at 9,500 feet, so sorry about that.
Yeah.
Just another example. It's interesting. Like you, we've got Rocky Mountain Parnassians. I think Smintheus flies in Cascadia. If it doesn't, then I'm sorely mistaken, and I apologize for that. But I know we both have Parnassus clodius, and they feed on Dicentra, and those have been really difficult to find, and even get eggs out of females. We'll talk about that later. But just a couple more species. Indra swallowtails, I talked about finding eggs and early instars along the periphery of the plant, but as they grow older, they like to rest at the base. So that's just one species where you want to use different strategies depending upon what instars you might be looking for. So we've talked about the more popular and less productive as applicable to a handful of species. Now I want to jump into the less popular, more productive, and that is netagravid female and set her up to lay eggs in a cage. Okay, the necessary equipment for that, obviously you need a butterfly net. I recommend a small habitat in a cooler. So if you do happen to collect a female, I would put her on ice to slow down her metabolism, to take her back to where you want to set her up and have her not stress out. And these are cold-blooded creatures. So if you collect a female and put them on ice, they don't stress, they just slow down. Okay, so most of you, I realize, can differentiate males from females in nature, but for those of you who don't, we'll just go over the basics. There are 3 basic differentiating clues to separate male and female butterflies, and that is visibility, flight behavior, and wing markings. So we'll talk about visibility shortly and then go just review a little bit for those of you not familiar with flight behavior and wing markings. I know many of you already know this, so I'll try to go over it quickly. So visibility. In nature, males do not outnumber females 10 to 1, but it almost seems that way because males are very obvious in what they're doing in search of females. I would venture to say if you see a butterfly in nature more often than not, you're seeing a male searching for a female. I mean, I'm overgeneralizing, of course, but they are very overt. And so if you are interested in collecting females and setting up to lay eggs, what I say in red is here's critical. The better you familiarize yourself with repeated, predictable male mating flight behaviors, the easier it is to contrast them to females once you start seeing females as well. I know many of you have seen both, and I don't know if you identify the gender when you take a picture of a nectarine butterfly, but sometimes before that butterfly approaches the flower, you might be able to identify it simply by behavior. So let's talk about male behavior. You don't collect males to get eggs, but the better you learn males are doing, the more contrast, I said this before, with females. So males, when not nectaring, are involved in patrolling, perching, hilltopping, chasing anything remotely resembling a female. I've got a joke about that here in a little bit. And tackling a female when it comes to mating. Male monarchs are not incredibly romantic and subtle with how they approach females. Speaking of male perching behavior, a few years back, I was leading a Utah butterfly field trip for about 10 participants hiking a trail adjacent to a river up South Willow Canyon, northern Utah, where I pointed out a perched male Wiedemeyer's admiral on a tree branch several feet above the river. I then picked up a small rock and asked the group a question. I said, do you guys know the difference between a female Wiedemeyer's admiral and this rock? And they just looked at me and went, no. So I picked up the rock, threw it up in the air, and he left his perch and chased after it all the way to the ground. And I said, apparently he doesn't know the difference either. So anyway, females. So once you understand males, once you see female behavior, it becomes more obvious. They tend to be larger, fly slower, more deliberately in search of host plants. They generally emerge a few days after the males, but virgin females know exactly how to find patrolling, perching, hilltopping males once to mate. Once they do that, they avoid males like the plague in inconspicuously going around and looking to lay eggs and nectaring and doing what they need to do to oviposit. So, you know, we talked about Julia orange tips last time, but if you walk through the habitat through a trail or whatnot, you probably see 12 male patrolling before you find a female. Not that the ratio is 1 to 1, but in terms of visibility, it tends to be more difficult. Okay, so we've talked about the behavior. Another tip is what we call some wing differences. Sometimes there's dimorphism going on. Other times there's different shapes of wings. So we'll just go over that here really quick. First, swallowtails. Western black swallowtails in Utah are very similar to Oregon swallowtails in the Pacific Northwest. And the females tend to have more blue. Obviously, the abdomen's wider, and they'll behave differently. Anti-swallowtails, the difference are more subtle. And I've noticed that on tiger swallowtail groups, Western tigers versus pales, the pale swallowtail females are a little bigger, and sometimes there'll be more of an orangish hue in either species than the lemon yellow of Western tigers or the more pale, and that's a very subtle difference. If we talk about pierids, the large marble, the females have a flush of yellow-orange and hindwing, and certainly off-white, yellowish in the forewing, which the male is more uniform off-white. Checkered whites, the females are more checkered, and in a lot of sulfurs, especially clouded and orange sulfurs, you've got a checkered black border in the female, whereas the males are more solid. Going back to brushfoots, the females are whiter, I've got males superimposed on females with these 3 species. My apologies, I shared some slides of this presentation back east, so that's why I keep bringing up Astyanax. But there's kind of showing that the females tend to be larger and the wings are wider. These are Photoshop false bilateral gynandromorphs. Can you guys say that 3 times really fast? Photoshop false bilateral gynandromorph. Anyway, this kind of shows you the difference, with laminitis and the size and shapes of the wings. And other brushfoots, smaller, when you go checker spots, crescent spots, those shape differences also are obvious, including greater frits. Even satyrids have differences, and the common woodlands tend to be dimorphic. Speaking of dimorphic, the great spangled fritillary females, I don't know if any of you have been in the field looking for males and you see what you think is a mourning cloak, that could be a female great spangled fritillary because they're really quite different. And then looking at females versus males of the gossamer wings, many of you probably know the differences, but the females can be brownish if the males are solid blue for some blues, and with other blues, black margins is more extensive. If you look in the first row, the silvery blue that you see there, the female has a darker black border, but not much for that particular subspecies of Glaucopsyche ligdamus. It's called mini punctum. It flies in the desert. But if you look at the western tail blue, the amount of black borders are so extensive that the bluish purple is almost obsolete. So it kind of goes species by species. And with the coppers, the females tend to be more checkered than the males, which have more of a solid coloration, with the exception of American copper. Okay, so we talked about the equipment you need to collect the females. So now you've collected a female, how do you set her up? Well, there's 4 overriding principles that you want to follow to set up a female to lay eggs. One is position the host cuttings or potted host adjacent to a light source, artificial light or sunlight. And some butterflies will lay eggs under artificial light, but I try to use natural light, sunlight as much as I can, either outside or next to a window where the sun is shining through. Number 2, place a female in appropriate size cage. 3, feed females regularly. That's critical. And 4 is kind of a new concept for many of you. It's called female prep time. So I will discuss that in some detail. But here are just some examples of some females laying eggs in cages where the host plant is next to the sunlight and they have a chance to lay eggs. I've got desert orange tips on the left, Wiedemeyer's admiral on the right, and red admirals in the middle on stinging nettle. Okay, so for swallowtails, what size cage would you want? I would say 24 by 24 by 36. Swallowtails kind of need a large cage because they need to fly to lay their eggs. So I wanted to share another video on this, and I'm not sharing a video on how to get eggs out of pale swallowtails. I'm actually going to share a video on how to get eggs out of western tiger, but the principle is the same. So let me stop sharing and see if I can find my videos. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so this is a western tiger swallowtail set up in a cage, and then I'll explain that during the video.
Hi, this is Todd, and today is Thursday, June 16th, 2016. Today we're going to talk about setups of getting eggs out of glaucous.
We can't see the video, Todd.
Western tiger swallowtail.
Okay, let me stop it.
Here, he's resting on the.
Oh, I didn't share it. Sorry. The longer I go, the more my brain gets fried. Let me try this again. I need to share that.
Okay,
Sorry.
we're good.
Hi, this is Todd, and today is Thursday, June 16th, 2016. Today we're going to talk about setups of getting eggs out of glaucous group swallowtail females. This is a western tiger swallowtail that we have here. She is resting on the butterfly bush, Buddleia davidii. We also have a potted willow, actually have a couple of them, and getting her set up to lay eggs. One thing that's notorious about glaucous group females, and by glaucous group I mean eastern tiger swallowtails, Canadian tiger swallowtails, Appalachian tiger swallowtails, western tiger swallowtails, two-tailed swallowtails, and pale swallowtails is that sometimes females are somewhat finicky about wanting to lay eggs in captivity. Notice that I'm using a 2 foot by 3 foot pop-up cage to get eggs. Usually if I had lemonitis females, which are red spotted purples, Wiedemar's admirals, spice rose, etc., I'd use a smaller cage, and I would probably pack it a little bit fuller with willows. But the thing with swallowtails, especially glaucous group swallowtails, is they need room to fly. So they need to fly around the cage, and they will fly and land. They don't crawl around and lay eggs. They fly to the leaf and very quickly lay an egg. And so one thing that I do to prep swallowtail females, especially the glaucous group, is I keep them in a closed area for 4 or 5 days before they lay eggs, because they're usually not ready to lay eggs immediately after they have been collected in the wild. And so what I do during those 4 or 5 days is make sure I feed them every day and kind of let their ovipositor argue with them a little bit, kind of increase that itch to lay eggs, so that when you do set them up, they have a better chance and more of an itch and more incentive to go ahead and lay eggs. So we'll go ahead and see how we do. Okay, this is Todd. It's 3 hours later. The female has been removed from the collapsible cage and has been taken inside and is being fed right now, even though she did have lots of opportunity to nectar on the butterfly bush. We're just taking a look now at the leaves, and I apologize this isn't focusing properly, but she's laid 6 eggs on this willow leaf, 1 egg on that leaf, 1 egg on that leaf, 2 eggs on this leaf, and 2 eggs on this leaf. She's already laid like 40 eggs and she's still somewhat fat. And so this setup does work. I do recommend potted plants as much as possible. If you use cuttings and set up cuttings.
Okay, I'm going to stop that short because I think that basically covers the basic idea of setting up. Oftentimes they'll lay more eggs than you want. So one thing you might want to do, let me go back to my PowerPoint just a sec. Okay, back to my PowerPoint. So I just want to, by word of caution, sometimes when you set up females to lay eggs, you're going to get a lot more than you want. So if you monitor it and you see a couple of eggs, you can take it down. You can take her back into the habitat and release her. Most people don't want 20, 30, or 40 eggs, but oftentimes with this group, it's either none or a lot. So you don't need to keep them set up for 2 or 3 hours. And I always try to recommend you feed them before and after so you can take care of the females and then release them back into the habitat. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so just talking about cages for different swallowtails, anti-swallowtails, I've had pretty good luck with the 12-inch cube, as well as the potted plant enclosure. This is actually a paint strainer, 5-gallon paint strainer, and a female anti-swallowtail laid a lot of eggs using that setup. I keep coming back to Lorquin's admirals, but I've had great luck in a medium pop-up cage with a plant called Salix purpurea nana, dwarf blue Arctic willow, and they can lay a lot of eggs that way. They also will lay eggs in a sleeve, a caterpillar sleeve that can be handmade or commercially purchased. I also had pretty good luck obtaining eggs from medium-sized brushfoot butterflies and paiards using what I call portable cage. This is a handmade contraption that I put together where the base comes from a heavy-duty plastic jar cut in half. I then place a container upside down with holes in it. I then fish aluminum screen around the circumference of the container flush with the jar and add post-mix permanently to connect all 3 and let it dry. Once it's ready, I then place a plastic lid that also comes from a plastic jar sliced in 2 on top, and then I pour water, before I put that last lid on top, I pour water into the base where I can put cuttings and just set that up. And these portable cages I've taken with me out in the field and been able to get eggs. So this is a picture of a setup for red admirals on stinging nettle. It also worked great on buckeyes, gray buckeyes, in our case, Junonia gricia. And then here's a picture of the same setup with clouded sulfurs. Now, again, watch your female, and if you see as much eggs as you want, you can always shut it down and release her, because as you can see, I've got a lot of eggs there and I didn't want that many. So that's just something you may want to watch. And for specialists, we have some specialists, not a lot, that will raise Spieria, where, and I don't want to go into too much detail because my time is running short, so I'm going to be a little more succinct going forward. But there is a setup to get eggs out of Spieria. Since the overwinters unfed first instars, females lay eggs haphazardly around dead violets. So you put her in the sack next to a window, make sure she's fed, and she'll lay a lot of eggs when she's ready to. And then those eggs sometimes take 17 days to hatch. Just a quick thought about going back to our gossamer wings. I like what I call twin cup setup for them. And what that basically is I fish the host and nectar source into a top cup, and then put that in a bottom cup with water, place females in and place it by a light source. And so those females have access. They can rest at will, they can bask at will, they can nectar at will, or they can lay eggs at will. So it's a nice little self-contained setup for lacinids that I've used. And this is what I just showed you right there. Those are Western Pygmy Blues, which I understand were remarkably more common in Cascadia this last year. And this is two of their host plants, Russian thistle and dragonweed. And as you can see in that setup, I didn't have to feed the females because they fed themselves. But when you do collect a female, you do want to make sure that she is fed both before and after she lay eggs. Which brings me to this mysterious concept, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'll be as brief as possible. Female prep time. So female prep time means keeping gravid females in a dark closet where they can remain dormant between 1 to 4 days before setting up to lay eggs, feeding them every day. And you're probably going, why? Where are you going with this? Why are you doing this? And the answer is to rearrange their basic instincts. So what I'm trying to say is, the first time I tried to get eggs out of a pale swallowtail, if you look at the picture on the left, that was what was happening. You've got snowbush ceanothus in cuttings. You've got penstemon in bloom. They were flying to the light. They flew to the light. They didn't stop flying to the light, and they were simply following their first instinct. Number one, instinct to fly to the light. And I've noticed over the years that they have 3 instincts in this priority. The second one is instinct to nectar. Obviously, you need to feed them. And the third is to lay eggs. So question is, how do we get the instinct to lay eggs to go from 3 to 2 and the instinct to nectar to drop from 2 to 3? And the answer is simple: feed them. If they have this instinct to nectar and you're feeding them, they're nectared. So that drops. And so this instinct to lay eggs now takes second position, which brings up the next question. Well, and this shows a Western tiger up close. You see the proboscis feeding. How do you get 2 to surpass number 1? And that's what this female prep time is. I put the female in the dark for up to 4 days. I feed her every day. And if she sits there at room temperature, her itch to lay eggs is going to increase and increase and increase. So finally, if she's been in the closet for 4 days and you continue to feed her, do not let her dehydrate. There's going to be like a whiplash effect, and you'll see a lot of eggs being laid more often than not. Now, some individuals can be finicky, as I said in one of the videos, but you want to keep them fed. And this has been helpful on some of the more difficult swallowtails. Okay, and like I say, you do want to feed them. Okay, so this is a picture of pale swallowtail eggs laid on snowbush ceanothus, using a similar setup with the female prep time. I'm not going to go into all the other groups for lack of time, so I want to summarize it with this slide. On the left, we see the group. The tiger swallowtail group takes 4 days. Anise swallowtails, inter swallowtails, 3 days. Medium to large brushfoot, 3 days. Sulphurous whites, checker spots, 1 to 2 days. And the orange tips, whenever I got eggs out of Anthocrocera complex, prep time was 0. Based upon their instincts to lay eggs on the mustards, they were ready to go from the moment I collected them. So that's just something I learned over the years. Okay, so let's talk about Paulette, how much time do I have?
Well, you're 10 minutes over right now, but we want you to finish up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to shorten it as much as possible. I want to talk about how to raise them, and to do that, we're going to talk about how to hatch eggs, caterpillar setups, and overwintering techniques, and then will be one section after that. Hatching eggs is relatively straightforward. You just need to take a look at, will first instar hatchlings, will they eat other caterpillars they find. And if they do, then you want to separate them out. Okay, so basically the first step is to consolidate eggs into a single container, placing hatchling larvae on host plant. That happens when they're not cannibalistic. If they are, you want to separate them individually into solo cups. And the third one is keep egg on the original leaf. So here's some photos. I take the caterpillar and try to dangle it using a teasing needle by its silk and put it on aspens. For other species like monarchs and queens, some marbles and orange tips, they tend to be cannibalistic. If an egg hatches and finds another egg, it will eat it. So I tend to separate them into different solo cups. And lastly, we're going back to admirals and viceroys and California sisters. Their eggs tend to be kind of fragile, and so they can collapse. So I don't recommend, if you can possibly keep them on the original leaf and set them up that way, I would do that without trying to remove the leaf at all. And so again, these are the species we're talking about. Caterpillar setups, we'll probably talk about 5. And basically, when you want to raise caterpillars, and I know a lot of people say, hey, I found a leaf, I'll put a caterpillar on it and put it in a jar. But more often than not, you want to use cuttings of branches of plant rather than a leaf, because the leaf loses nutritional value and can dry up quickly. So we'll talk about these 5 setups quickly. Open terrariums and open buckets. Simply, I recommend put host cuttings inside a bottle and then secure the bottle at the neck with facial tissue, and then put that inside open terrarium or an open bucket. So this is the open terrarium technique. This is the open bucket technique. They're basically very similar. What's nice about a terrarium is you can see through it. What's not nice is it's more costly. You can always also put these, what I call, on the left, I call it a bouquet. These are gray buckeyes on plantain. You put the host plant in, put the caterpillars on top of the host plant, put it inside the bucket, and set it up like that. Now, these semi-closed terrariums are just for lemonitis again, because if you use willows and cuttings, they tend to get crispy. So if you look on the left picture, there's glass on top of there to help generate a higher humidity than a typical open terrarium technique. Closed containers, I don't recommend except for a few species. The closed container technique has a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it creates more control over a caterpillar's microenvironment, but then you have to process them more frequently. And so I basically use, I'm going to go back to 30,000 feet. I use closed containers basically because sometimes some caterpillars are cannibalistic, so I have to separate them out. That may or may not apply to Colorado ferret streaks, but sometimes I lose the larvae, so I like to use these little squat tubs with little cuttings of oaks, and I change them out every day, removing frass every day and giving them fresh cuttings. There's also legume feeding polio blues that I use, small containers where they will drill into. What's interesting about them is they use all sorts of legumes in nature, but they will actually sugar snap peas that you can get from the market. And when they feed on these sugar snap peas, they go from first instar to pupa in about 14 days. I use a closed container technique for Indra swallowtails, but only at last instar. Before then, I'm putting them on live host plants outside until they're 4th instars. And then I'll put them in using a container technique where I just put in a few sprigs in the closed container, and then I replace the frass and give them fresh host once or twice a day for 8 days. Indra swallowtails are notorious for getting sick, so we tend to spoil them. And once they purge, as you see in the circled picture, I put them in what I call a gizmo, which is soy tissue core with paper towel, and turn that upside down, let them pupate. And then if it's a pupa that's going to hibernate, I'll put it in a bucket to overwinter. Otherwise, I'll put it in an emergence container. We talked about the twin cup method for getting eggs out of smaller butterflies. It also works well for several applications, especially checker spots. I also use them for Spieria, but for checker spots, what I'll do is I'll fish in the scroff and put in the post diapause larvae. And why this is helpful, sometimes they like to crawl off the plant. So if I use the bouquet technique where I put plant into a water bottle, they'll crawl off the water bottle, and sometimes they can't crawl back. So I use this twin cup for that application. These are some of the checker spot species that I use that for. Twin bucket is the same principle, but I'll fish in asters for the crescents, and they will fall off with disturbance. So what I do is I fish in the top bucket the asters, and then place that on top of the bucket with 2 inches of water, put on a lid, and that's a nice little setup. Should they fall off, they can find the plant again. And then potted plants, I talked about what I've been doing with Euphidias checker spots. And I put potted plant enclosures on top of that. So here's another way where we can use potted plants to raise butterflies, or we can use caterpillar sleeves. I've already talked about the Lorquin's admirals, and I've talked about Euphidias, but this is a type of caterpillar sleeve I can use for California tortoiseshells, or on the left, that's Hesperopsis alteus larva on saltbush. Okay, so just one quick thought. I shared this photo as a setup for caterpillars of the California tortoiseshell, but what I actually used it for was females of the California hairstreak. California hairstreaks are kind of notorious, and they like to tuck their eggs underneath the bark. And so there's actually, in this picture, there's several females of California hairstreaks. They've got the Ceanothus volutinus to nectaron. They can rest in there, they can bask in there, and they can crawl down and lay their eggs at these imperfections in the bark and the host plant. Okay, the last section is overwintering. And I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time because I've run out of time, but I just want to say there's just some basic principles. However you overwinter your butterfly caterpillars, be it egg, unfed first instar, a half-grown larva, mature larva, or pupa, you need to create a setup that provides these stages with sufficient humidity to avoid desiccation, airflow to avoid mold, and protection from predation, and to a lesser degree, the elements. And this last point, tiers of difficulty in overwintering early stages from easiest to most difficult are pupae, meaning if you're going to overwinter pupae, they're one of the least difficult to overwinter because they're more secure. They're in the pupa stage. Mature larvae of some of our other species are not difficult. Half-grown larvae can desiccate if you don't give them enough moisture, and they can get moldy if you give them too much. So they're touch and go, and the most difficult are unfed first instar larvae. Ova are not too bad. So I have 4 techniques on my website. I'm not going to talk about them a whole lot tonight unless you ask me questions afterwards because of lack of time. But I overwinter some in the backyard, some up in the mountains, some in a wine cooler, and some in my refrigerator. And let's see. So basically, in my backyard, I just place pupae of swallowtails in a bucket, place that in a glass terrarium, and put that in a box. This is my box deteriorated after 25 years, so I bought a new box. And this is my setup this year. Those little cups are filled with holes, and they have Euphidias and Closini half-grown larvae. And you can see I've got a hygrometer in there to try to make sure that I give them enough moisture. It's a little low, so sometimes I'll go in and spritz them. Refrigerator isn't very user-friendly because it doesn't provide a lot of airflow, and it doesn't provide a lot of humidity, but I do put swallowtail pupae in buckets and pour distilled water to simulate humidity, and they don't get moldy in it, so that seems to work for that setup. And the last one, I believe the last one, is up in the mountains. Up in the mountains provides great humidity, great airflow, and so the stages that you see here work with the setup. Lycinid ova, Limenitis hibernacula, half-grown nymphalid larvae, bottom cage only, because it has more insulation. That will be filled with snow, where that bucket that's in the tree will not have good insulation. And so that's not good for half-grown nymphalid larvae, and so forth. I also use wine coolers, which are one step above a refrigerator. They do provide humidity, but not great airflow, making them good for Lycinid pupae, any species that overwinters as ovum, skipper mature last instar caterpillars, or loose swallowtail pupae. And what I do in the wine cooler, these are some Euphilodes pupae that I put in there, and then I will check the humidity, and I don't need to spray them because the humidity of the wine cooler is sufficient. And I've used it before, and they don't get moldy, so the wine cooler seems to work well. And one last thing about Euphilodes blues is their pupae. Well, they're attached to Eriogonum species. In Cascadia, I don't know if all your Eriogonum bloom in the spring, but some in Utah bloom in the fall. So with Euphilodes, not only do I have to overwinter them in a wine cooler, I oversummer them outside. You see in the bucket, that's in my backyard. So once April comes, I will take them out of the wine cooler and put them outside and expose these pupae to increasing day length as you approach summer solstice, and decreasing day length as you hit autumnal equinox, and they will break diapause right before their natural Eriogonum hosts will bloom. It's really quite an amazing thing. So that's what makes raising euphalotes kind of a special undertaking. Because of lack of time, I'll share this screen, and as you go back to the recording, you can still certainly review this or ask me questions afterwards. But here's a recap of the overwintering stages, containers, setups, and instructions. So thank you for your time. Sorry to go over. One last slide I want to share with you. I'm really quite fond of this Indra swallowtail called Papilio interminori. But if you look at the segments of the caterpillar and look at that, it reminds me of a silhouette of a sunset of its very same habitat in the Colorado Plateau and the Badlands and the Butte. And I thought I want to share that. So thank you very much. And I will stop sharing and answer questions.
That's a lovely concluding slide, Todd. That's gorgeous and very, very informative. There's a question in the chat from a couple people, so I wanted to put it to you before we go on to the discussion. Scott Ellerby and Sego Jackson were asking about feeding the adults during breaks from egg laying, and so if you'd like to comment on that, and we're now at the time where anybody can unmute and ask questions. So Scott and Sego, please feel free to unmute and follow up. So would you be willing to answer that, Todd?
So yeah, what I didn't say in my presentations is different species groups are not difficult to feed. So what I do is I keep the female in a closet in a little mini pop-up cage. Sometimes I'll put them in the refrigerator, slow down their metabolism. I'll use paper towel, spread that on the table, and then put the female on the paper towel. And for most butterflies, their proboscis will immediately uncoil if they are dehydrated or need to nectar. And they know, because I've tried to feed females and they refuse. Now, there are some stubborn groups, swallowtails and satyrids off the top of my head, where I've had to take a teasing needle and go through the proboscis and uncoil it into the paper towel with honey water, 10-to-1. And if they coil it back, I'll try 3 times. But I've noticed over the years and decades that when a female butterfly isn't dehydrated, she's not going to nectar. And that's fine. I just offer. Did I answer the question?
Scott, Sego?
That's exactly what I needed. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're at the open discussion period. So does anybody, oh, Sego says yes, he got what he or she needed as well. So other questions, comments?
Shall I go, Paulette?
JP?
Go ahead, JP. Let's hear you.
It's all yours.
Okay, that was like masterful, Todd. I really enjoyed that, and I've heard you speak before, and we've talked at great length about many of these things. But every time we talk, I learn something new, and I did this time too.
Awesome.
I had 2 things that you might enjoy. I'm thinking that with regard to the Parnassus larvae, okay, you know, they're obvious, like you mentioned, and there's a reason they're obvious, is that they're poisonous.
Right. Yeah, that's what I suspect. Yeah.
And so, like, you know, if you're poisonous, it probably is useful to flaunt it to make sure that everyone knows and is on the same page. And then with regard to the ants and honeydew, I know that's kind of like what, you know, everyone says, because, you know, they have aphids as a comparison, and a lot of times they're on the same plant, and the ants are probably actually getting honeydew from aphids, but I don't think that's what they're getting from lichen. Now, I have been told by people who've been studying this that it's probably a queen mimic pheromone or some substance that's aromatic like that, which is probably accurate, but I prefer to think that it's a love potion.
Yeah,
I'm done now.
Yeah,
Thanks.
JP's right. On the aphids, it's honeydew from the gut. And on the lycaenid caterpillars, they have special glands that release. And it's actually, depending on which species it is, they have a a couple of different glands that release different compounds that do different things. And so, but one of those is an ant attractant of some kind. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oftentimes I'll get excited because I see ants, and then I go, "Oh, they're not tending caterpillars; they're tending aphids."
yeah, I like that one picture you had of an ant tending that one caterpillar because there was an aphid right beside it too. I don't know if
Yeah.
you saw that.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
see
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I didn't see
Yeah,
that.
there was an aphid right beside one of them. So, but you didn't mention it, so I thought I might mention it to you to pay
I
attention
appreciate
next
that.
time.
I'll go back. I'll go back. I
Yep.
didn't see that. So maybe one thing I'd like to say is thank you for your patience. I have been struggling with this presentation for a long time with the idea of too much information versus not enough information versus too much. I mean, I just kept going back and forth, and it did go a long time. So thank you for
All
your
I can
patience.
say is the images made it, man. That was just classic. I ate that up.
Thank you.
And Todd, I think you have a very forgiving group here too. So
Yeah,
and a very sympathetic group. So
yeah, appreciate that.
How? Yeah.
Your pictures were great where you had like some of the video, you had you saw a picture, but then you also had a still where you captured the detail. Those were absolutely marvelous, really
Thank you.
fabulous.
Well, whenever I do a video, I look at it and I go, did I say everything I wanted to say? Is it intuitive? Or is the video of poor quality where I can put in a still shot? Because, you know, a lot of the videos I did with an iPhone, and I'm not a videographer per se.
Well, if we listened to everything you had to say, and we listened to everything that you could say, we probably have to rent a room.
Well, with my age, I'm pretty good for an hour. As you notice, I was kind of stumbling across my words because it's just like, how long can somebody articulate clearly? And I was going too fast and I was stumbling over my own words, so I apologize about that. I was just trying to get to content.
Well, that's why we record our presentations, because people can go back then, and I suspect a number of people will go back. You know, people will see it for the first time on the recording, but I imagine some people will go back because there's so much information and so much detail.
Yeah.
So it will be posted on our website, and thank you very much, Allison, for helping me out there. I don't know where I got that .com thing from. Anyway, she posted the correct address in the chat, and I will correct it in my notes for the future. But it's Washington Butterfly Association. It's the website, and it will be posted in at some point in a couple of days.
Yeah. Sounds good. Any other questions? I covered a lot of material. I'm willing to expand on anything that seemed vague. I had presentations before where there's no questions. Everyone's just
We're trying to drink from that fire hose.
yeah. And if we had been live, I probably would have gone over half that much material because when I'm live, I can read people's faces. If their eyes gloss over, I'm dumbing it down. You know, I don't want to shove content down people's throats. So
I think people are pretty attentive. Yeah, it was fabulous. Just a lot of information to take in.
yeah.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
No, this is great, Todd. Thanks for doing this. I have an egg that I attached to, well, I broke it off of a plant, and given I was leaving, I attached the stem back to a paper clip and stuck it in with the host plant. So it's going to have to fend for itself until I get home in another 10 days, and I hope the eggs are still there.
There you go. Yeah. Sometimes when you leave town, you've got to come up with all sorts of setups.
What is it, Cheryl? Do you know what it is? What egg it is?
Well, I'm supposing that it might be a Mormon metal mark. So it was on the nivium that's right adjacent to where I see all of the Mormon metal marks in the fall. So I've seen the caterpillars there, and so I'm hoping the egg will make it. But I do worry about the mold that you mentioned, Todd. They kind of looked like they had a bit of a coating on them when I first found them, but maybe that's just what they look like when they overwinter. So it'd be interesting to see what I find.
Yeah. I know our Mormon metal marks feed on Eriogonum like the Euphalotes blues, the buckwheats. I don't know they're exclusive to buckwheats in Washington state or not.
Is it too late to ask a question?
No, by all means. This is the fun part.
I'm asking you, Todd, but also John. I had to leave the room for a few minutes, but I thought I heard as I was going out, John Pelham, you suggesting that you weren't sure that Lycaenids produce honeydew. Is that correct? Did you say that?
They don't produce honeydew.
What's that?
They don't produce honeydew.
You do not think that Lycaenid larvae produce a honeydew?
I
And
do
James
not-
confirmed that.
James Adams confirmed that.
Yeah, the honeydew, strictly speaking, is basically extra sugary dietary stuff from the butt. But Lycaenids don't produce anything out of the gut. They have specialized glands that, and they actually have, some species have multiple different types of glands that secrete different things. And so some of them can include sugary substances, and so it's basically like honeydew, but it's not necessarily the same thing because
Well,
it's kind of
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's convergently evolved.
right, right.
It's like pigeon milk. It's not milk. It's convergently evolved. Like, moths' eyes have evolved 7 different times. So they're in different parts of the body, as you know. But it's well established that Lycaenid larvae of many species do produce a sugary treat for
No,
animals.
they don't, actually, no.
I disagree with that, John. I think there's a large literature on it.
I think there is actually, and they went and found that most of the stuff is, like more related to chemical substance that attract the ants, independent of the honeydew. It's like queen mimic pheromones, right?
Well, there's plenty of pheromone mimicry in.
Well, more important than all of this disagreement is that the gland, one of the glands that is involved is called Newcomer's organ. And that's Herbal J. Newcomer discovered this, and he got, famous forever and ever. That's one of our Washingtonian, mentors.
Yep, that's for sure. Well, we can do a little more homework and come back on this next time. I'll bring you some of the Jeremy Thomas stuff on it
Yeah.
and Nomi Pierce.
Thanks to Karen Reed on the Hell's Half Acre in Blackfoot, Idaho. I forgot about it, but that's the one where I took the picture of the English swallowtail egg. By the way, did anybody laugh at my silly joke about the white Eye female not being a rock?
Yeah, that was good, Todd. I laughed at that.
I think so.
Yeah, we've done that with the dog shit flies. They have the males flying around in a swarm, and you throw a rock the right size through the swarm, and they all chase it.
It's tough to tell a joke when everyone's muted. You're going, oh no, I'm not a
But about the honeydew, I mean, we were always told in classes that what we call honeydew comes from sap sucking insects like aphids and lace bugs and things like that. And it's basically the sap is coming out of the plant at a higher pressure than the insect's guts can handle. So they have a bypass valve that goes out the rear end, and that's the honeydew, is the excess sap. So caterpillars are not sap suckers. So if they've got something similar, it's probably not exactly the same as honeydew that you're
Not
getting.
the same. It's just it's a convergently evolved different substance, but it serves the same purpose evolutionarily.
Very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for that information, Regina.
Todd, you're brilliant with this stuff. I don't know anybody else who has a command that you have of the field.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The great thing about it is that you share it so much and you teach so much with it.
Appreciate that. I'm not gonna live forever. I feel like, I want to get it out there and then I can die. No, I'm not gonna die for 15 years, but still. I shouldn't be talking that way. I'm only 61. Sorry. Shame on me for talking that way. But
I was going to say, Todd, Bob has already lived forever. And you're a lot younger than he is. So
And thank heavens for that.
That's absolutely true. I quote a little anecdote to somebody the other day. I said, "Oh, I remember when we did that." And I realized that anecdote was 50 years old.
yeah,
I-
no, that's why
I joined the Lepidopterist Society 65 years ago.
wow.
Fuck.
I only
So
joined-
Todd, it's all relative, forever goes on and on,
Right.
man.
yeah.
So don't tell it all then. Keep it going. It's like
Yeah.
be like the Arabian Nights, keep parsing it out bit by bit by bit.
Right. I agree. And so, any other questions or?
well, I will say one more thing, and that is I found it interesting that you find mature larvae to be relatively easy to overwinter because it's quite different with certain. I'm a moth guy more than a butterfly guy, and so I
Right.
reared a lot of moths in my life, and overwintering any stage of a larva can be ridiculously difficult, at least for some species. And so pupae are, as you said, the easiest. For me, eggs are easily the second easiest for
Yeah.
most species I rear. So
Right. Well,
larvae,
I've had, when you talk about skippers, I have no problems with the Rhinus mature larvae, but the ribes, cloudy wings, oh my gosh, they would die every time. And then I finally figured it out. All you need to do is spritz a Rhinus, dusky wing larvae that are mature. But the ribes, is anybody here overwinter the ribes larvae? They shrink and they shrink and they shrink until they're gone. And one time I placed some shrink, like spritzing with water didn't help. I almost had to baptize them in water. I almost had to submerge them. And then, and I thought, I got so disgusted one year, I put larvae almost in a bucket with just too much water. I said, drown, I don't care. I can't overwinter with their ribes. And next thing I know, they had returned to their full size before they ever started overwintering, and they were fine. I went, well, how do you not drown them? So I called John on the phone last year. I said, I can't believe it. I actually overwintered successfully a Thoribes pilates larvae. The ribes, how do they get, they don't feed in wetlands. How many Thoribes species are in wetlands? They're in relatively dry situations, but the larvae need moisture to survive the winter, at least in the lab.
Are there handy little small moisture sensors that you use?
Only in the overwintering setups, I use hygrometers, which measures temperature and humidity. I've got them in my outdoor setup. I've got them in my wine cooler, and I have them in my, I don't use them in my refrigerator, and I don't use them in the overwintering.
Are they just a small unit that and I don't know where to buy them, or oops, sorry.
Thanks for the love.
Yeah, I know, these new computers.
Yeah, what I do is like I've got checker spots outside right now, and the hygrometer says humidity is 48%. I would like it closer to 60, so I'll spritz them with water. But there's 6 containers out there. There used to be 7. There was one little population where I overspritzed them. It got a little moldy, and they're dead. So that's always, it's always what you're fighting with some of these is too much humidity without enough airflow is mold, and too little humidity, regardless of airflow, can be desiccation, and those are both bad. And you're trying to split the defenders. You go right in between the two and get that. And yeah, like James says with pupae, that's a wide gap, and there's some leeway there. But
mold can really do it, Todd.
What's that?
I said mold can really do it. I remember trying to rear Aeneas Crixus valerata, the Valerata Arctic from the Olympic Mountains back in 75, 76. And they go through 2 winters, and we got them through the first winter in a refrigerator in Seattle. The second winter, I had at my disposal the very sophisticated climate chambers at Charles Remington's lab at Yale, and we got them to within weeks of where they should have been through the second winter, and all of a sudden the last 2 of them got mold in their butts, and we had no idea why. But I mean, it was a 2-year process, and it was pretty frustrating.
Yeah, when I raised Aeneas jetta, I was able to get them past the first diapause at second instar by giving them 24 hours of light and really healthy. And so the next hard stop was at 6th instar. Some pupated, and some I would overwinter. And I think I got lucky because I've got some jetta papered right now that diapause at 6th instar. But Arabia Magdalena, your Maggies, I failed lately. Can't do Maggie. Can you do Maggie?
No, I certainly never could. But the one guy who did, what was his name? Charles Slater. He lived up in Central City, Colorado. Yeah. And Charles got a lot of Satyrids through, Satyrines through, and he reared Maggie. I think Gerald Hilche might have done up in Alberta too. I'm not sure. But Charles Slater is the only guy I know who actually did it.
Right. I've done Aeneas, but not Arabia. So anyway, it's like
I tried a lot with Arabia epipsidia when I was a kid, common alpine spuddlers. I never got them through.
Yeah. What's the common name of Arabia pepsidia?
Either common alpine or Butler's alpine.
I think back in the day, they used to call them Arab Pepsi, but that's probably not a good common name.
Well, it's named for a species in England called Sodea, Psodea.
Yeah.
And Butler thought that they were rather like Sodia, but different, so he named it Episodia. The proper name should really be Eurybia episodia, but I don't know. I've always pronounced that second P and just called them Epipsidia, kind of like Pipsissewa, you know.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, thank you everyone for being patient with me.
Oh,
Thank you very much. It was a marvelous presentation, Todd, and I'm really glad that we were able to record it. So thank you for allowing us to do that.
Yeah, and thank you for your patience with, I know how to go to the videos. I kept getting flustered, and sorry about that. So
No, it was great. The videos were terrific.
they're
Yeah.
fun, charming.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for a wonderful second talk for this season, Todd. We really appreciate it.
sounds great. You guys have a great evening. It's great meeting with all of you again. I would like to participate or attend future WABA presentations.
Oh, please do. We would welcome you
I'm sorry I missed David James' presentation, but I got to see it after it was done. So he did.
on the recording. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Oh, can I ask one more question for John or for Robert? Do you guys
Yes.
have buckwheats that bloom in late summer? That was my question.
Yeah, well, late summer and autumn, the Eriogonum niveum blooms in the autumn, late summer and autumn.
And do you have a
We've got, yeah, Nivium, there's about 2 or 3 that do. And Nivium is the one that, is used a lot as a food plant for Mormo, but Mormo will lay eggs on buckwheats that aren't blooming. So like Elatum is another one of our food plants that they use a lot.
So do you have any ties in with Euphalotes species that don't fly in Cascadia until August, September?
Not yet, we've been looking.
There's a
So you
second
haven't had
brood
to
of,
worry about oversummering Euphalotes pupae. You overwinter them, but you don't necessarily, because I have to oversummer some of my species, which is makes it complicated.
there's a second brood of Acmon blues that are all over the autumn niveum down in the gorge, for example. But
Yeah.
of course, they've had a previous brood on different plants of different kinds,
Because
both
yeah,
legumes and Eriogonums.
nice.
No.
Nice.
No. No.
No? Who's saying no?
Perry, talk to us.
Were you talking to the cat or to us?
Well, Perry muted himself. Maybe he was talking to somebody else.
Okay, perhaps he was. He was. Okay, he was. He's talking to the dog or whatever. Okay.
You're
I thought
wrong,
it was-
Bob. You're wrong.
Yeah, I thought he was doing like Mom always does and say, no, you're wrong, you're wrong.
Anyway,
Problem is they're usually right that I'm wrong.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and
Okay.
we'll look forward to another talk from you in the future, Todd. So thank you
Sounds good.
again, and everybody have a great evening. We'll see you next month. Don't
Sounds
have a talk yet, but
you
we'll
guys
get
later.
one.
Thanks so much.
And I'm up next, yes? Just checking.
Yeah,
Is it not me?
for April?
Yeah. Is it?
I was gonna
I'm-
check
yeah,
that,
it's me.
actually. I couldn't remember, so I was gonna
Yeah,
check.
it's me. It's me. I'm up next.
Nice. I'm
What's your
looking forward
topic,
to it.
James? What's your topic?
It's defenses in butterflies and moths.
Great.
Butterflies and moths. Butterflies and
Of course,
moths.
you can't avoid getting some moths from me. I'm sorry. That's just going to happen.
Oh, zzz.
You bring us
Remember
the
that
beeline.
butterflies are technically speaking just one specialized day-flying group of moths. So
There
That's
you
right.
go.
Just
Wow.
moths.
Okay, we'll see you all then next month. And I think it's the 3rd. Is that right, James?
yeah, it's the 3rd.
Yeah. Okay, we'll
I
see you
remember now.
then.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right. Good night, everybody. See you.
Bye.
next-
Bye.
Bye.